Hey, how's it going, YouTube? It's the Dual Threat Podcast here, your daily news source for all things sports. I'm Drew. This is Jacob. Going into our next edition of how teams can make the playoffs. It's going to be a little different this week because we've got two teams on the to-do list for this week on how teams can make the playoffs. We've got Coastal Carolina and BYU. This is a very interesting two different teams, and the reason why we're doing this is because rumors have it, and sources close to us say they're supposed to play this weekend at BYU. It's not official yet at the time of us filming this video, but it could be in 10 minutes, could be in 10 hours. We don't know. But for now, that's the information we have, so we're going to go off that. So, Jacob, you want to start us off on how these teams can make a run?
Yep. So looking at where they come in the rankings, BYU comes in at number 13. Coastal Carolina comes in at number 18. Pretty similar teams in terms of they're just beating everybody by a lot. We've talked about this a lot. Similar to Cincinnati, a lot of these teams are pretty similar. BYU played pretty much nobody. Coastal Carolina also played pretty much nobody. Liberty game against Coastal Carolina this weekend could get canceled. If it does, like you said, seems like BYU is on track to play Coastal Carolina. This, to me, almost seems like a makeup for BYU because it seems like the College Football Playoff Committee, when rumors were having about them playing Washington, they really liked that for BYU. They feel like BYU kind of ducked that game, so they didn't have to play a Power 5 team. And I think they paid the price for it, being ranked 14 in the first rankings and 13 in this one. So I think this could be their redemption game to get back on the playoff committee's good side if they come out here and beat Coastal Carolina big. And I think that's the first big step that they have to take in order to make the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think these two matching up would be a pretty good resume holder for whoever wins this game to kind of show that, hey, we're better than a 14 or 18 team. You should put us at least in the top 10 for now. And I think either of these teams going undefeated will not be enough to get in the playoffs. I think that's pretty obvious. And so there are a few other obstacles that have to happen for them, kind of similar to A&M and Cincinnati. Things have to happen above them for them to get in. And so we're just going to kind of touch up on, because a lot of things have to happen. This is a very unlikely scenario, but considering the way that things have gone this year, you never know what happens. And so, number one, you got to have Notre Dame beat Clemson in the ACC championship to knock off Clemson, have the two losses for them, and that just completely gets rid of having two ACC teams into the championship or into the playoffs. And that would be huge for a lot of teams. That would give A&M, Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina, and BYU a chance to get to that fourth spot. And right now, at least for me, A&M has a better resume than these teams. And so you got to have A&M lose as well. The most likely scenario is A&M losing to Auburn this weekend, or maybe even A&M losing to Ole Miss. If that does happen, Ole Miss's game just got postponed this weekend, I believe. And so you got to have A&M lose as well to Auburn against Bo Nix. Kellen Mond not looking great. You need that to continue into next week for a chance to get in the playoffs. You need Notre Dame to come out, have that elite defense that we've talked about this year, have that offense that can put up points and have your defense stop the other team so you can, run up the score a little bit on them. And you've got to do that with Clemson as well. I'm sure Clemson will be a favorite in that game for the ACC championship. And so you got to have Notre Dame pull off the upset one last time for that fourth spot to open up. And so you want to talk about a few other things that have to happen for one of these teams?
Yeah, for sure. So like you were saying, Clemson needs to lose. That knocks them out. A&M probably is going to end up needing to lose. Realistically, you could get in, say, for instance, Ohio State misses one or both of their remaining games. A 5-0, 4-0, whatever Ohio State would end up being, I think would drop out. Personally, I think so. We've talked about it a little bit. So I think you either need one of A&M or Ohio State to miss the playoff. And it's going to depend on whether or not you could need both potentially. because in the instance of if only one happens, say Ohio State is out, that leaves 2 playoff spots. But then to me, it feels like A&M and Cincinnati take those spots personally over a BYU or a Coastal. Even though one of them will have this win over each other, it still feels like they're going to need something more to put them above Cincinnati. It feels like they're kind of their golden boy UCF of a few years ago, and in putting them at number 7. So I think you got to get an A&M loss along with Ohio State losing or not being able to play, or Cincinnati losing a game. I guess you need there to be 2 spots available, and one of those 2 teams to not be in the mix somehow. So I think, like kind of we've been talking about, it all comes down to this game really, and that's where it's going to differentiate Coastal Carolina from BYU, because right now they're 13 and 18, decent gap between them, but realistically they're the same. Like they're both middle of the pack, top 25 teams that aren't really going to do anything unless they get a statement win, and that's what this game would be. So kind of diving into this game a little bit, I think you look at the stats, you look at the eye test, you look at just the numbers, it favors BYU. And I think personally, I think BYU would win this game. And if you are a Cougar fan, I think that's good news for you, because Zach Wilson is, I believe, 5th in the Vegas betting odds for the Heisman Trophy. That's encouraging. He's having a great season, 2,700 yards, 26 touchdowns. They also have a good run game. They have good receivers. They have a good defense. And that's something that I think BYU gets overlooked a lot, is their defense. I mean, you look at, and again, right, it's hard to determine really how good a team's defense is when they're playing Western Kentucky and Navy and Troy. But in terms of the numbers themselves, they're 4th in points allowed per game with only 13.9. They are 7th in yards per game allowed with 293.3. Only 8 teams in the country allow less than 300 yards per game, and Notre Dame is not one of them. And so again, strength of schedule, who they play, none of that's taken into account, just the straight up numbers. But BYU has an underrated defense, and I think that's going to come into play when they play this game. Coastal Carolina has not faced a defense like this before. They haven't faced an offense like this before. And I personally think it gives BYU the edge in terms of winning this game and going on to potentially make a playoff run.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't really want to beat up on Coastal Carolina, but you look at their first game of the season against Kansas, they won 38-23. They are the only team out of these 2 teams to have a Power 5 win. But a 38-23 win over Kansas says a lot, because that's the most Kansas has scored this year. That's the least amount that Kansas has let their opponents score this year. And that's the closest game Kansas has had this year. And, I mean, as a Power 5 win, that's probably the weakest Power 5 win that you could possibly have as a non-Power 5 or in the Sun Belt Conference as a win. And so I don't really want to beat up on Coastal Carolina. They are 9-0. They have looked better over the last few weeks. They have improved, as many teams have, and that first week is kind of hard to determine. They do have that pretty big win over Louisiana. And so, yeah, they just beat Texas State 49-14. They look good going into this weekend. It was the College Game Day game against Liberty, but we've heard that Liberty will no longer be able to play, and now Coastal Carolina will play BYU. And so another thing you have to have if you're a BYU or a Coastal Carolina fan is Alabama to beat Florida. We've talked about this game a lot. We think Alabama probably ends up winning that game, but Florida is probably the best chance of putting up a fight against Alabama in the SEC just because of their elite offenses. So you got to have Florida losing. You got to have A&M losing. That puts up 2 losses. You got to have Clemson losing as well. That gives each of those teams 2 losses. And back to what you said about Ohio State, I think I'm starting to agree with you that I don't see them getting in to the playoffs if they're not eligible for that Big Ten championship because, well, to me, if you can't even, be eligible for your conference championship, why should you be eligible to go to the playoffs if you don't have that many wins? Plus, you have teams that have played twice as much as Ohio State. And so I feel like as a committee, you should value amount of games, amount of snaps taken over having a record, because you could go 3-0 and you could have a team go 10-1, and I would say the 10-1 is more impressive than 3-0, depending on who you play. And I say all these other teams have played, have better resumes than Ohio State at this current moment. So I say Ohio State, you got to have a game get canceled. Michigan's game is canceled this upcoming weekend. I believe Ohio State's last week was canceled. So, I mean, it's kind of getting pretty likely of a scenario where that does happen for Ohio State. Let's see, Georgia already has 2 losses. Iowa State already has 2 losses. That's good. They're probably out of the conversation. Miami losing would probably be best. I think if BYU or Coastal Carolina were to come out and just dominate this game and maybe win by 30, I think maybe that would bump them up above Miami, just to show that they've beat an undefeated team pretty handedly, to show that they're, better than that team by a lot. And so that might put them up above Miami, but I think just as a caution thing, you'd want Miami and Northwestern both to lose another game. As well as you'd want Wisconsin to beat Indiana, because Wisconsin can only play like 4 or 5 games this year. They're not eligible for that Big Ten championship, and Indiana still is if Ohio State is no longer able to go there. And so I look at Indiana and I see that their only loss is to Ohio State by 7. If they win out, they do have a pretty good resume if they do end up winning the Big Ten championship. So you got to have Wisconsin beat Indiana. What else do you see for BYU or Coastal Carolina for them to go to the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you kind of hit on everything. Looking at Iowa State and Oklahoma, I mean, one of them could get in. I think you mentioned Iowa State, but it feels like the Big 12 is just, I don't know. I mean, maybe Power 5 bias. I definitely think this game is going to show something because, I mean, like we said, it's the first real game either of these teams have played. And so I think that when you just look at who's above them, like, yeah, Indiana needs to lose. Oklahoma and Iowa State, one of them's going to win the Big 12 probably. So ideally, you'd have one of them lose another game. But nobody behind you is really a threat unless Northwestern somehow wins the Big Ten, I guess. But they lost to Michigan State, so probably not. I really think it comes down to this game, and can you win out? And again, you do need a lot of other stuff to happen, but for the most part, I think it starts right now. And if you remember back to, I think, our second iteration of this series, we said Notre Dame's big route to the playoff is beating Clemson in that first game. And they went out and did it. And I think it set them up very well for the rest of the season. I would not be surprised if BYU comes out, wins this game by, let's just say 21. Let's throw out a figure. If they win by 21, I would not be surprised if they're number 8, right behind Cincinnati, or maybe 7 right above them. Probably not, but potentially. I would not be surprised because like I said earlier, it feels like the only reason BYU is so low is because they kind of feels like dodged playing Washington, a Power 5 team, because they wanted to stay undefeated. And I think that's how the playoff committee feels. But if they come out here and play a higher ranked team and a higher sample size team in Coastal Carolina than Washington, anybody could be 3-0. North Carolina started the season 3-0. Like, they were number 5 after being 3-0. And that's another reason why I think Ohio State has a better chance of being left out, is because you've seen that this season. You've seen that in seasons past as well. You've seen Wisconsin go 2-0, miss with COVID, and then come out and just look terrible. You've seen Oregon go 3-0, come out, lose to Oregon State. There's a lot of stuff that can happen with a team that's 3-0 with just such a small sample size. So I really think BYU comes out here, wins this game convincingly, or Coastal Carolina. I don't mean to pick one side or the other. I do think BYU has the edge, but really whoever wins this game will be 10-0, first team to double-digit wins, and I do think they'll be slotted right around that Cincinnati area. And they, again, just like Cincinnati, just like A&M, they need some stuff ahead of them to happen, but I do think they have a pretty solid shot at getting in the playoff if they can win this game pretty convincingly.
Yeah, and just going back to that Ohio State argument, I've seen a lot of Buckeye fans just say, look, we weren't playing very good teams. Why can't we just put that in the win column? And I'll tell you why. You look at last year's Alabama team. They went up, played against Mississippi State, I believe it was. They were a 35-point favorite, and they ended up winning the game by 35. So you're like, well, why are you saying this? And I'll tell you why. Because Tua got hurt that game. And so there are a lot of things that could happen against teams that are not very good that you can't just predict. And the fact, Justin Fields could get hurt, or somebody on Ohio State could get hurt, or maybe they just pull off the upset and Ohio State just straight up loses. So you can't just say that you would have won the game even though you were a heavy favorite, and you can't just chalk it up as a win, go to the Big Ten championship. Yes, it's not Ohio State's fault, but the problem with this is Big Ten started way too late, and I think as a committee, you look at Ohio State, they did nothing wrong. They got COVID, as most teams probably have in the top 25 this year, and they're going to have to deal with the consequences, because I can almost guarantee you that the committee is not going to let an SEC team pay off for those consequences of Big Ten starting too late and Ohio State only playing 5 games. And so I don't think Ohio State does get in. I don't think you can just chalk those games up as wins when they didn't play, just because of the scenario where somebody might get injured or they just might get upset in general. But yeah, so there you have it. You got to have Alabama win. You got to have Notre Dame win. You got to have Ohio State miss a game or lose a game. But the missing a game is probably the more likely scenario, considering they only play Michigan and I think it was like, who was it? Michigan State, maybe? Something like that. Not two very not good teams. You got to have A&M lose to Auburn or Ole Miss. They're probably not going to lose to Tennessee. Tennessee has really gone down in the drain ever since their start this year. You got to have Cincinnati lose a game to Tulsa. I believe they're going to play them twice for the AAC championship. So got to have them lose one. I think you'd rather them lose in a conference championship rather than to lose the first one and then win the second one. You got to have Miami to lose a game, maybe. You definitely got to have Indiana to lose a game if Ohio State's going to not be able to go to the Big Ten championship. And then you got to have Northwestern lose a game, whether that's the Big Ten championship or some other game. And there you have it. That's how BYU or Coastal Carolina gets in. It all starts with who wins this weekend. Their odds jump up a lot. It might go from 0.1% odds to 2% odds, but that's still a ginormous jump. So it depends on who wins. If you lose, no chance you're getting in. So it all comes down to if they play and who wins that game. All right. Well, thank y'all for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. I believe we're going to tweet out one of our lines later on tonight, maybe. We see a line that we like a lot, and we think it's going to move a lot throughout the week. So you never know. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Dual Threat. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Helps us out a lot. We're on the road to 200. We passed 100 a few weeks ago, and then we're trying to get that back up. And yeah, make sure to comment any differing opinions. Do you think Ohio State gets in if Ohio State can't play in the Big Ten championship, even though they might play that weekend of the Big Ten championship? Yeah, let us know down in the comment section below, and thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.